Welcome to Film Witch, a podcast with me, Sandy Settle, practicing pagan witch and tarot reader for over a decade and a big fan of films. Here I talk about movies, their intersections with witchcraft and femininity, and whatever else I have in my mind, which is usually a lot. Blessed be, come in and sit for a spell. And please, rate and review me on Apple, follow me on YouTube and Spotify, and share it with someone you think might enjoy it. It helps way more than you might realize, and it means everything to me. Please consider joining my Patreon, which is the best thing you can do to help this podcast continue. You can also find me on Instagram and on Letterboxd at FilmWitchPod. You can send kind words, suggestions, and business inquiries to filmwitchpod@gmail.com. From 1980, Jack Torrance has been hired as the winter caretaker for the Overlook Hotel, a resort in the remote Colorado mountains. He, his wife Wendy, and their son Danny will be spending the entire season totally alone. Or will they? As time goes on, Jack's behavior becomes increasingly erratic as his grip on reality begins to slip. Is the Overlook really haunted, or is it Jack's personal demons causing the Torrance family's descent into domestic hell? Kubrick's exploration of the psychological terrors wrought by the patriarchal mind rings more ominous than ever. For episode 5, my good friend Christina Bassler is here to discuss The Shining with me. Welcome, Christina. Thank you for being here.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
I, too, am very excited. And thank you. I wanted to say off the bat, thank you so much for being one of my first Patreon supporters. It means the world to me. And thank you so much for being so enthusiastic about my podcast from the very beginning. No matter what happens, I will never forget it. So thank you very much for that, my dear friend. And it's really nice to talk to you. We haven't seen each other in person for a while, but we've been friends for quite a while, and we used to work together.
Yes.
At a certain Philadelphia cafe that we will just say will remain nameless.
Fair enough.
Certain infamous Philadelphia cafe.
Yeah.
If you know, you know. But yeah, we were coworkers for a long time, and now we are friends. I no longer live in Philly, so I don't see my Philly people very often lately, but I do live outside of Philly at this point, so I'm always happy to keep contact with you and everybody else. And I'm really excited that you're here. So, I'm
very excited.
Yes, definitely. You chose this film today, and I wanted to ask you, a couple things. I know that recently you've begun to explore horror, right? The horror genre in film. And you picked this film, like I said. Is there anything in particular you feel like, you were drawn to this particular film? Any reason?
Yeah, well, I actually picked it because this is the first Stephen King book I'm reading.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I haven't finished it. I'm only like halfway through, but I actually live in Boston now, and I went to a bookstore, and it was in October, and they had all those Stephen Kings out, and I picked up a different one, and there were just so many, and I'm like, oh my God, where to start? And I was like, you know what? I really like The Shining, so I'm going to read that. So I was reading that book, and I've really liked this movie, but, by no means am I a film buff. I can't name any other Stanley Kubrick film. I don't know many Jack Nicholson films. But I picked this one just because, I have always liked it. I remember watching it for the first time in high school, and the shower scene just scared me to my core.
When he goes in room 237, you mean, and the lady's she's sitting in the bath.
Yep.
I was like, the shower scene.
Yeah. I
remember, I thought of Psycho for a minute, and I was like, oh, is she getting her films mixed up? But no.
No. Sorry, that scene. And I remember being, in high school at my friend's house, hiding behind a floral pillow, being like, this is just the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. So I pitched this one, because it was like horror, but I also, pitched it because I just really enjoy your insight and facts. So I selfishly wanted to hear what you had to say about it because I really like it, and I'm really enjoying the book.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for saying that. Sometimes I worry that I'm just rambling,
No. In fact, I was
listening. This is what I think.
Well, I was listening to your it might have been your latest one on the Rob Zombie film. And
Lords
you
of Salem.
mentioned that, yeah, and you mentioned that like something like that's you liked it more than The Shining. And I was like, oh, I gotta watch this Rob Zombie. I think I tried watching House of a Thousand Corpses and was like, I'm too weenie for this. I'm making my way into horror, but so I was like,
Totally.
oh, I'm like really, especially after listening to that podcast, I'm like, oh man, I'm really excited to see what Sandy has to say because you've just always been, such a good film person, especially with like just I love hearing like, oh well, this person made the creature in this film, so that's why I picked it out. Is I enjoy this book, but I'm not a film buff, so I'm excited to hear a film buff take on it.
Wonderful. Well, I am happy to always share my thoughts on
Yeah.
everything. You may have noticed this, since you said you're reading the book right now. I have also read the book in the past, and would you agree? I don't know how far along in the book you are at this point, but would you agree that the film and the book have some pretty significant differences?
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, the biggest difference was Jack is much more of a person. I feel like in the film, he's just sort of like very, maybe this is, a bad take, but I feel like he's just pretty one dimensional, just like creepy. Whereas in the book, you get so much more of his personality, and same with his wife and Danny. So I've really enjoyed just seeing them more like fleshed out human beings as opposed to just like this psychological thriller where he's just a jerk, really. So
Yeah.
like having, and I loved, this is maybe just like kind of my mushy heart, but learning more about their relationship and them falling in love, it just gave more of like a human aspect. And I'm about halfway through the book, so it's already breaking my heart knowing, having an idea of how it ends.
Yeah.
But I'm, reading like, oh, this is how they fell in love, and they're both like into English and things like that. So I would say it's giving me much more of like a I like seeing the depth of these characters that are more humanized, I guess.
Yeah, not to get too much into Stephen King because we are talking about the film, but he's really good at that, he's really good at really making you care about characters, right? Like, it's always
Yeah.
like kind of it's almost like a bad thing with his books because you always know something terrible is going to happen to them, but
Yep.
like he makes you really care for them and makes for very effective horror, right? Like, you kind of have to, at least me, speaking for myself, I feel like you have to have a personal connection to like to really feel it, to know, to really
Yeah.
be scared for the characters, to really be devastated when something happens to them, that kind of like personal element to horror that I like about King's books. But yeah, I agree with you, that probably the biggest difference in the books is Jack and the way his character is set up, or in Kubrick's film, kind of not set up. But
Yeah.
we can get into that more for a little bit further on because I have some notes, that I wanted to share about that specific point. Before we move too far in, though, I have to mention that that gift set that I sent you, that GIF set. I don't know how you say it, but I died. I couldn't believe it. I still use Tumblr. I'm a Tumblr person because I'm a nerd, I guess. But I'm just
great.
old.
Long
That's
live
my
Tumblr.
problem is, I know, right? I'm just an old person, I guess. Only old people use Tumblr or something. I'm not really sure. I haven't figured it out. The Tumblr crowd is eclectic, but I sent you a gift set I found. I think it's by this user that I follow called Tales from the Crypts, I think is their username. But they made a gift set of like Jack like coming up the stairs after Wendy and going like, I'm not gonna hurt you, I'm just gonna bash your brains in. But he's like marked with like a 2025 over his chest, and
Oh yeah.
and they like edit
Yeah.
it, and she's like, get away from me. And I'm like, man, this is the mood. Like,
Yeah, for
like,
real.
this is how I
Yep.
feel about the coming year. Like, get away from me. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I had to share that because it was so like apt, it was so of
Yeah.
this moment that you and I are in right now in so many ways.
Absolutely, yeah. And honestly, still shout out to Tumblr because those are really high quality. Like I'm re-looking at them now. I'm like, wow,
Right?
that is like a seamless graphic right there. Like, long live
Yeah.
Tumblr.
Yeah, like
Evergreen.
not only definitely, like not only are there incredible creators on there, like, but they are really taking like high quality like blues and like rips of films and stuff and just really making really beautiful stuff over there. So shout out to the Tumblr folks.
Yeah.
So there was this, I found only a couple, to be honest with you, only a couple quotes from Kubrick about this film, right? He is known for being, or he was known rather, because he did pass away in the early 2000s. He was known for being a very private person, right? And very reticent to share much information about his films, about his reasoning about his films, about his process, all that stuff. He just didn't give interviews very often, right? And he was kind of known for this, for like not really wanting to talk about himself very much and not really wanting to talk too much about his films. It seemed like he was one of those people who kind of preferred to let his work speak for itself, right? However it spoke to people. But I did find a couple interesting quotes from him. One I'm going to read real quick just because it specifically is what he said when asked about the quote-unquote theme of The Shining, right? He said, "There's something inherently wrong with the human personality. There is an evil side to it. One of the things that horror stories can do is show us the archetypes of the unconscious. We can see the dark side without having to confront it directly." So when asked if there was a theme, right, this was his answer. I suppose my strongest feeling about this quote, right, after revisiting the film yesterday, it had been a while since I had seen this film, I will say. I had seen it maybe, I think, twice before now. And I gotta say, girl, this film is bad vibes, like bad vibes. I don't know if it's because this moment that we're in culturally is so extreme,
cursed.
Right? Yeah, so cursed. But it was a rough watch for me this time because it was just like the vibes, man. I was like, this film is like evil, you know, like it's so like oppressive.
Yes, exactly.
The music, like this, like isolation, and then like Jack Nicholson playing Jack Torrance as if he's just completely unhinged and mentally unstable from like scene one, right?
Yes.
I said to David, my husband, today, I was like, this man gave me like a fight or flight response from like the first scene in this. And I've seen this film before, you know what I mean? Like, but this time I was like, if this man touched me, I would scream my head off. Like, that's the feeling I got from this person. And it wasn't even like I was thinking about like knowing the rest of the film. You know, like I've seen this film before and I know what happens. No, I was just like, this guy gives me the creeps, you know? Like, but in the book, it's not like that.
No, that's why it was so shocking.
Yeah.
Like, he's like kind of like, I mean, the book, like, you know, goes into his, you know, substance abuse issues and, you know, getting fired from the school, etc. But it's like it's just a complex person. Just because someone's struggling with substance abuse does not make them like evil, you know? So that's what really struck me with the book compared to the movie. Because, like from the moment they introduced Jack, you're like, ugh, oh no. Like, cursed, you know?
Yeah. And it's like, I feel like, you know, this is particularly an aspect maybe of the film, that the vibe of the film that I feel is there, right, is kind of like specifically about, like, because the book is kind of like this, there's a lot more supernatural elements in the book, right? And I know you said you're only halfway through, but you'll see what I mean, especially as you get towards the end. Like, the book is more overtly, I would say, a ghost story, right? A supernatural horror story.
Yeah.
Whereas the film is like much more of a psychological horror film / like a domestic abuse film, right?
Yeah.
Like, Kubrick specifically does not make it clear to us if these ghosts are real or not. He leaves that purposefully ambiguous when you watch the film. Like, you never know for sure, and I'll get into this a little bit more later too. You're never really sure, for the most part, if Jack is actually seeing ghosts, if Danny's actually seeing ghosts, you know. It's kind of left unclear. Like, we don't have, like, a confirmation of that. In the book, there are scenes that are different, that are more of a confirmation of there being actual malevolent spirits in the hotel, right? But, like, a lot of the film, to me, is about kind of not just, like, he calls it, you know, this evil side to the human personality. I would make it more specific than that, if you ask me. And my intention with this podcast was always to go into kind of the thornier issues, the political issues of being a feminine person in this world, of specifically witchcraft applied to the contemporary world and applied to films that I'm watching and things like that. So I'm not going to leave out, this strong impression that I got of the film being about the evil of systemic patriarchy, right? Mm-hmm. Like the evil that is like, and it's partially it has to do with the way Jack Nicholson plays this character from scene one, like I was saying, and partially this, a permeating kind of atmosphere of like ambiguity around whether or not this is actually supernatural events, right? But
yeah,
to me, it's like the evil is this like hierarchy of white patriarchy, right?
Yeah,
that's the evil and like Kubrick, may be non-specific in this quote, but to me, watching the film as a woman, it felt very specific. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I was like, this is a white man who thinks that everybody else is beholden to him and is a drag if they're not, right? And he's like, I didn't hurt my kid, like, I just yanked him or whatever, like there's so many scenes like this. And it's just like, yeah, maybe he's going crazy, but like, I don't know, maybe he's just like a horrible asshole. And maybe he always was. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, so I think this quote to me is very interesting, right? Because to me, it's like an evil side of the human personality. That's interesting. Like, let's dig into that. Like, whomst in the human population is exhibiting these evil behaviors? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, let's get Kubrick was clearly doing certain things. Sometimes I wonder, like having seen other films of his, having watched Eyes Wide Shut, for instance, or having watched Barry Lyndon recently, I always, I wonder because he was so reticent to talk about his films sometimes. So, he wouldn't elaborate, which is totally his right. But at the same time, I'm like, was he conscious of this in his own artistic process? Was he conscious of this underlying kind of like understanding or recognition of white heteropatriarchy and its oppression, And I think he was to some extent, but he didn't talk about it very much. So it's hard to quantify, it's hard to say, yep, that's what he was talking about. Because it's like, it's at the end of the day, it's kind of all conjecture because he didn't like confirm that to anybody. There's no quotes where he's saying that. It's just people being like, I think this is what he was talking about, But for me, and for the purposes of this podcast, I was like, oh, this film's about like how evil like white patriarchy is.
Yeah, or it's also making me think like, can this character Jack, take accountability for his horrible behavior, or is it ghost? Like it's sort of like that where it's just like no, it was the ghost, instead of like, why can't you take accountability for your actions? Like, when he's going on like, I just grabbed him, but it's like, no, you injured your son. Like that happened.
I mean, like, did a ghost sort of make you say that?
Exactly. Exactly.
And it's like, to Kubrick's credit, you're like, is that what he's saying? Like, you wonder. Because like I said, there's no quotes that I was able to find where he's like explicitly like, that's what this film's about,
And in terms of, this sort of like patriarchal, everywhere all the time. So I also remember when I watched this movie for the first time, I was like, man, that lady is so annoying. Why is she running like that? Why is she screaming like that? And I remember a friend was like, oh, well, the director just like screamed in her face and, was really like verbally abusive towards, Shelley Duvall to try to get something out of her. Is that true?
So I have a section about that coming up in my notes.
We can apologize. Okay.
No. It's totally okay. I totally understand your desire to talk about that because I think that it's important as far as like the current discourse around the film, right? I think that it's something that kind of needs to be aired out. So you're right, Christina. There are a lot of stories, online floating around and have been for a while about Shelley Duvall's treatment by Kubrick during the filming of The Shining. And this, I have a couple different quotes and pieces. The first is from the Wikipedia page for this film, or I think maybe it was on Shelley Duvall's. It's one or the other. It's either on Shelley Duvall's Wikipedia or it's on the Wikipedia for the film.
Okay.
Quote, he intentionally isolated her and went through exhausting shoots, such as the baseball bat scene, which she had to perform 127 times, according to this. Afterwards, she presented Kubrick with clumps of hair that had fallen out due to the extreme stress of filming. For the last 9 months of shooting, she said, the role required her to cry 12 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week, and, quote, it was so difficult being hysterical for that length of time. In an interview with Roger Ebert, Duvall said that making the film was almost unbearable, but from other points of view, really very nice, I suppose. In a 2001 interview, she later said, I wouldn't trade the experience for anything. Why? Because of Stanley. And it was a fascinating learning experience. It was such intense work that I think it makes you smarter, but I wouldn't want to go through it again. In a 2021 interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Duvall spoke openly of the emotional toll of the role and the challenges of long days on set, but said that Kubrick was very warm and friendly to her. So that is from the Wikipedia, right? Each of those quotes is cited, right? So you can kind of, if people want to, they can go on the Wikipedia and they can do all their research themselves on like the sources for those quotes and all of that. But that's what you can find on the Wikipedia page regarding that specific issue. I searched after this on Reddit, or I did a Google search, I believe, in the Reddit thread that I'm going to read from came up after that about this subject, right? And I think it's important. I'm going to read this other thing that I found, right? But I'm just going to share what I think real quick. I think that hindsight can be a little bit muddy as far as like looking back on something that happened in a charged emotional environment like a film set. I think it can also be difficult to look back and see something clearly after a lot of time has passed, right? Some things, were discussed about Shelley as she got older, was out of the public eye a lot. Her mental health has been debated as far as if she was kind of, doing very well mentally towards the end of her life. Some people said that she wasn't. So I think, if it's a quote from her when she was closer to the end of her life, it should probably be taken with a grain of salt because I don't know how good her memory was around that time or anything like that, But I have watched, personally, I haven't watched all the clips that this comment is talking about, but I have watched a few that I found on YouTube. From the clips that I found, and this is just going by what I've seen, right, it doesn't seem to me that Kubrick and Shelley did not get along. To me, it seems like they got along fine from the clips that I watched, right? He didn't seem to be excessively mean to her in the clips I watched or anything like that. Okay. To me, if anything, I would say, like I said, I haven't watched everything. I'm sure, somebody's might have proof that I didn't see. I don't know,
Yeah.
I can only speak on what I've actually seen myself, but to me it seemed like, and I've read other quotes about, referring to this and other accounts. It seems to me that perhaps Stanley Kubrick was a little bit of a prickly person, right? But not ill-intentioned, right? Another thing, and I know it, you can't compare this person to another person and all that, but there was another quote from the Wikipedia I read that talks about how, I was reading Danny Lloyd's Wikipedia, the little boy who plays Danny.
Yeah.
And there are several accounts that Kubrick was very protective of Danny on set, that Danny was not told that he was in a horror film, that he was told that he was in a family drama or something like that. And I don't know how he got some of Danny's reactions in this film, those looks of terror on Danny's face and things like that. I wouldn't know how those reactions were elicited from him, maybe he was like, how would you look if you were really scared, or something, maybe something like that. Yeah. Who knows, right? This was in the 70s. Who knows? There are some accounts of that set. There are conflicting accounts of the set. But all I know is that I read that, this was a man who was very protective of a child on set, a very protective of a minor on set, right? And the clips I saw of him and Shelley, I would not describe them as him being excessively cruel to her or mean, right? If anything, there was this one clip I was watching today where they're kind of having, I wouldn't even say they're not angry with each other. They're having kind of a heated argument about a specific section of the script, right?
Yeah.
Where it's clear to me that they are affable enough, right? They're just kind of throwing ideas around or talking about their points of view regarding a certain scene and how she's playing it and and Kubrick explaining to her why he thinks she should do it a certain way, her countering him and saying, this is what I think, And the clip kind of ends. It's not a super long clip, one of the clips I watched today, To me, it just seemed like they got along okay, and...
Oh, good. Okay.
It's so hard to say, right? Because people, I think, they take things that they find online and they are like, this man abused her, And it's like,
yeah.
Did she say that? Did she personally say that?
Yeah.
That is one thing, right? If she's like, this man abused me on set. It doesn't seem like that's what she said when she was alive. To me, most of the quotes I found said that the set was very challenging, right? That the set was very difficult. But then she also, is quoted saying that she found him very, warm and friendly and all that. So it's like, that's kind of, not conflicting necessarily, but it's just not quite what this other narrative has set up,
Yeah.
And I feel like the internet, to be fair, the internet does have this tendency to take something and run with it, to be like, she had a bad time on set. Oh, he was abusive to her, and no doubt plenty of directors on 70s sets were abusive to the women on their cast.
Yeah. I was going to say, I feel like I'm part of the problem because I'll read the headline and be like, and then not read the article. So I'm glad that
you should. You're like that bad guy. No, but for real, the internet is reactionary, right?
Oh yeah. And I just have no faith in men ever, so I just automatically am like garbage, but won't really look into it. So I'm glad that you're
a lot of
able
times
to.
they have but a lot of times a lot of men have proven to be garbage,
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, well, just, I think it's okay to desire proof, both ways, one way or the other. We just need a little proof, right? We just need a little bit more insight. We need, a direct quote from her saying that's not what happened. We need things like that. As women in public spaces, I think we need to feel reassured that way, right? There's certainly nothing wrong with that. So I think, when you hear that, it's totally within your rights to feel that sense of alarm, especially with a film like subject matter like this one. Like I said, this film gave me serious bad vibes this time, it's like a very scary, harrowing film as a woman, I feel.
God, yeah.
To watch this time. I don't know if it's because, I also have a kid now of my own.
Oh, yeah,
and,
of course.
I was just so, I've seen this movie before, and I was so horrified, when Danny comes into the room, and he has, marks on his neck, and his sweater is torn. I just was filled with, this visceral horror, of this child being hurt,
exactly, yeah.
And I was like, I have seen this film, I know he lives, but I was still, so I don't know if it's, but anyway, not to get sidetracked, I do want to read this quote, this other thing real quick, just for people who are listening, just so we can kind of move on, because I said I would read it. So this person is replying to someone had posted on Reddit and was like, did anybody hear about this narrative about Kubrick being abusive to Shelley Duvall on set? And does anybody have any thoughts or feelings or quotes or accounts of this, right? This person's name is Peter Given Bless on Reddit. And they said the whole Kubrick abuse Shelley meme grew out of a few instances recorded in a documentary called The Making of The Shining. And then he goes through the clips here that may have kind of caused this narrative, right? One is where Duvall is seen complaining about her hair coming out while shooting the scene where she feeds Danny through the bathroom window and tries to escape from Jack the same way herself. I'm assuming trying to squeeze under the stuck sash window, the frame caught her hair, and a skeptical Kubrick telling the crew not to show her sympathy as it doesn't help her, but the mood is light, and even Shelley herself is smiling. Another shows her missing her cue during filming and having a brief but heated argument with Kubrick about it. I think this might have been the clip that I watched today. I'm not entirely sure. Both are clearly frustrated. Duvall complains that about not being able to get the door open. After Duvall gets to give her side to the camera, she explains that she'd been given the okay to break for some food, and the action cue was unexpected. The third was a moment where Duvall is seen lying on the floor on the set after collapsing from exhaustion, and she, in this clip, is being attended by crew who are comforting her. There is no doubt that the shoot was demanding, exhausting, and emotionally draining for her, particularly because of her character, and it shows in the performance. Duvall herself addresses this in the documentary where she explains the stress of the shoot and inevitably the necessity of the stress, and that though she did at times feel her relationship with Kubrick was adversarial and she resented him for pushing her, it was for the best, and she felt overall her involvement was positive. Bear in mind, this was part of an authorized documentation of the shoot, which Kubrick himself could have vetoed if he thought it misrepresented his methods or portrayed him in a poor light. Okay. This person goes on to kind of share their personal feelings. I don't think it applies in this case. I just think that part is important, right? That this kind of narrative started from a few clips in the documentary, The Making of The Shining, where Shelley is like clearly under like various forms of duress from the stress of shooting, right? She has some heated interactions with Kubrick in the footage, right? And like, for instance, it sounds as though the clip with her, talking about her hair coming out is because perhaps her hair had gotten caught on the window frame, right? Which is different from this narrative of her hair falling out because of stress, right?
Right, yeah.
So one has to wonder, right, how much of this is legitimate, how much is fabricated through, like, the wind turbine of the internet discourse. When something kind of gets, kind of elaborated, it gets, like, just blown out of proportion and becomes this, like, sordid thing, right? To me, it sounds like sometimes Kubrick and Shelley would get in arguments, right? Sometimes he would push her. And seen today in the same light, I think that kind of like pushing your actors or your actress to that extent is probably frowned upon these days, right? Back then, I think it was more accepted as like, we're making art. This is the artistic process, right? So I'm not saying it's okay for a director to treat his actors like shit. What I'm saying is that back then it was kind of like something that was just more widely accepted, right? That you would push your actors really hard. And some directors today, I know they've been described as being similarly difficult, right? That they make people do a lot of takes. Like, I think David Fincher is like this. There's one of those, I think it's Fincher, where, like, he's just infamous for, like, making people do a million takes, Some directors are still like that. Like, do I think that a director should be like that? No. But, like, if that was what happened, that's a little different than him being, like, purposely mean to her, and things like that. So I'm not sure I have the receipts that I need to be like, yeah, that happened,
Yeah. I'm just glad to hear that, like from like quotes from her, saying that overall, it was a good experience. Because I guess that's where I'm like, well, what did she say? What's her to so? And of course, that's not something I looked into at all. So,
oh no, it's okay because I looked. I just went,
this man is bad, and looked no further. So if she feels that way, like I'm glad to hear it.
To me, it seems, all the quotes that I found, she kind of was like, this was a really difficult shoot, but I generally really enjoyed it, and I appreciated the experience, and he was good to me, That's what I found,
Good, yeah.
Those were the quotes I found.
Yeah. So in terms of like it being difficult to shoot, was it snowing that much? Like, how did they film that? Do you know?
I don't actually know how they ended up filming the snow. I would assume that that is real snow. Like maybe they went up to
Yeah.
somewhere. So all I really found as far as like the shoot goes is that they shot the entire film in the UK and mostly on sound stages.
Oh.
The snow could very well be a soundstage. I don't think it was, but I could be totally wrong about that. Feel free, y'all, to comment and be like, Sandy, you're wrong. It was outside. It was in, so and so, and this was how it happened. Because I am no expert on The Shining, and I'm never going to be. I don't intend to be. So, as far as like the shoot goes, I was referring specifically to Shelley, referring to the shoot as difficult for her emotionally, psychologically, and physically. Right.
Okay.
So I
yeah.
don't know, all I really know about the process of shooting the film itself is that it took place in the UK and it was on sound stages for the most part. I know a lot of the interiors of the hotel were based on real interiors of the hotels and rooms. And then I also know that this is a notable film for the first use of, maybe not the first use, but one of the first films to use Steadicam. So when you see like, those really wide shots and like the tracking shots that he used, like the one with Danny on his tricycle, that's Steadicam, right? And this is one of the first films to get to use that because it was a totally brand new format at the time, right? So it's very notable for its use of Steadicam specifically.
Is sorry, is a Steadicam when it's like on a track or?
I believe so.
Okay.
I am not a
Wow, that's
cinematographer, but
Yeah.
I believe so. Yes, it's a certain kind of tracking shot, right?
Yeah.
That enabled people to have the camera, from for a distance, but like mounted, right? So you could just track the shot in a very even way.
Do you know what's
That's
funny
all I
is,
know
like-
about Steadicam. Don't ask me any more questions.
Okay.
Some camera person's gonna come on here and be like, Sandy's so full of shit. She doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm like, you're right. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. You're totally right.
It's funny because I've watched this movie a lot, and every time it's that scene where Danny's on the big wheel, I'm like, damn, can I get a big wheel like as an adult, or do I just get a bike? I have a bike. I'm like, nah, man, I want like a big wheel.
I thought that this time I was like, I wish I had one of those when I was a little kid.
I feel like my neighbors had. I don't think I ever did, but I think like either my cousins or like my neighbor had one. I'm like, oh my god, this is the future of transportation. Like big wheels.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm down. just give me a big one of those, and
I know, right?
So I have another quote here. Moving on, I have another quote from Kubrick that I thought was really interesting that we could talk about a little bit. As far as, like, as a companion piece to that other quote I read about him being asked about the theme of the film and going into, like, the evil in humanity and all of that, this is another interesting quote from him. And it almost contradicts the first quote, and it almost, like, a little bit, but...
okay.
Let me hear your thoughts after I read this quote to you. I don't like to be told what something is about before I see it. I think the best thing is when the audience looks at a film and wonders whether something that they see is an accident or whether the director or writer meant them to know it. I think subtlety in allowing the audience to discover for themselves what it is the most important thing, and that's why I've always tried to avoid interviews and explanations about the films. I think the film should be able to speak for itself. This quote reminds me of another quote that I really love from Robert Eggers. And he said, there's this quote from him where he says that he's never trying to put a specific message in his films, right? That's never like, he's never like, this is what this film is about,
Yeah.
He said specifically that he is never intending to do that. And he wants to just approach his stories and his characters as if it was through, their eyes in their time. But I thought it reminded me of that quote, this quote from him where he's like, I want the audience to discover themselves what the most important thing about the film is, right? And that's different in a way from his other quote, right? About like a theme, right? I'm sure that when you're asked as a filmmaker point blank about what the theme of your film is, sometimes you're just going to say something to get the person to stop asking you that.
That's fair.
But what do you think of this quote? What do you think of this?
I have two thoughts. One is about me because my Leo ass, gotta. And I have another more.
He was a Leo. Kubrick was a Leo, by the way.
Stop.
Important thing to know.
He didn't take interviews, and oh wow, interesting.
Well,
so
he was an artiste.
That's
like,
true.
I'm not going to tell you about what my art means.
I would not be able to shut my mouth.
I respect that.
Yeah.
I think he was just like so. His pride was in his process. That's what I would say.
I just cannot relate even a little. So my first thought is I actually like inadvertently do this all the time. I don't watch trailers. I don't read. I literally go into so many movies blind. Like complete. I have no, like Wicked, I don't know what it's about. I've been inundated with ads, but like I have no idea what it's about.
I'm kind of envious. of that, to be honest.
Dave, my husband is also named Dave. He and I like joke about how I just have this like fascinating skill of just having the blankest slate brain. So for instance, when I saw Terminator, I was like, I think it's a robot, but like I don't really know beyond that. And then when I watched Terminator 2 and he was the good guy, I like fell on the ground. I was like, oh my God, he's a good guy in this one? And this was in 2021. I had no idea. Because I didn't read anything about it. So wow. I guess I don't do it on purpose, but I just am like, I'll see what it's about. Like I can appreciate that because I do that, but really not on purpose just because, I don't know, I'm one-dimensional. So I'm just like, I'll see I'll see when I see it. And it does make for like pleasant surprises. Like I saw that new Hugh Grant horror movie that's just goofy as hell.
Don't spoil it for me. I haven't seen it.
I won't. But yeah, I
want to see it. I love him. I love the idea of him as a baddie.
It's fun.
I mean, I've only seen him play a baddie in Paddington 2. Like, have you seen that movie? I'm like, this is the evilest thing I've ever seen him do.
That's hilarious.
It's so great. Have you seen any of the Paddington Bear movies?
I feel like I saw the first one, but again, I just don't remember.
The second one is exceptionally good.
Okay,
so
I'll have to look into it. Well,
but he is likewise a villain. He's a bad guy. Yeah.
So it's funny because like on your, you guys should sign up for the Patreon because on the Patreon, Sandy was talking about comfort films and a lot of them I haven't seen. Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
So I'll have to add Paddington too. Yeah. I mean, of course I've seen Bill and Ted's, but the other ones I was like, oh, that sounds so nice. Oh, that sounds so lovely.
Oh, I hope you watch them, and I hope you are comforted by them. Right?
What's the one? Yeah, what's the one with the sweaters they were talking about? Everyone's wearing chunky sweaters in one of the comfort films.
Harry Met Sally.
I have no idea what it's about. No idea.
You must watch. You must watch.
So that's the thing is like I just don't pay attention, and it really comes in handy. I know
that sounds fantastic though.
Yeah, I know she has a short haircut, and I know it's Billy Crystal, right?
It is, yes.
No?
It's Meg Ryan and Billy Crystal.
Okay.
But anyway,
didn't even know it was Meg Ryan.
We're getting a little off track.
I'm getting off track. I apologize.
What do you think of Kubrick's quote about not wanting people to go into his films and make their own conclusions?
So that I do like and I do appreciate. And my other thought is I think no matter what an artist does, if you're painting, if you're an author, even if you're like, it's about this, inevitably someone will go, no, it's about this. So even if you do say, it's when you put art out in the world, it's up for interpretation no matter what. So I think him, I think it would have been no matter, it's about Jack's, toxic masculinity or something like that. Someone would be like, no, it's about capitalism or something like that. So I think that it makes sense and it's prudent to be like, I want the audience to go in. I don't want them to know what it's about and, come to their own conclusion. Because that I feel like happens with art no matter what.
Mm-hmm. I feel like this is just my personal thoughts. I don't have any receipts for this, but I kind of feel like Kubrick was a person who kind of liked to fuck with people. Like, not in maybe an overtly malicious way, like more of like a humorous, because he was personally tickled by it way. But he put so much weird little, like, innocuous detail in his films, right? And in that quote, he kind of is like, I like to, kind of have people question, their kind of their perception of what they're seeing, right? if you read into that quote, you could be like, I like to fuck with people because I think it's fun. You know, like that's the vibe I get from that. True. I don't know if that's what he meant, but like I was like, oh, you just like to fuck with your audience because you think, you know, it's fun to put weird shit in your films. It's almost like David Lynch, you know, where like he absolutely point blank refuses to explain himself as an artist.
I love that.
Where they're like, what does this mean? He's like, I'm absolutely not going to say anything that you want me to say. Yeah. He's like, I'm not going to talk about that. You know, and I feel like Kubrick was the same way, where he's like, I am not going to say that that's what that means because I want the audience to like perceive it however they want to. And boy, have people perceived this film the way that they want to. Let me tell you, you go on the Wikipedia for this film, and there's like 10 different wild theories about what this film is about, you know? It's like about the genocide of Native Americans. It's about the Holocaust. It's about this. It's about that. You know, it's about like I'm like I didn't get that from, you know, like how is this film about the Holocaust? You know, like but have you ever there's this documentary I would not necessarily recommend this documentary, but it's out there. It's called Room 237. And basically this film is a quote-unquote documentary that is just like examples of all the wild theories people have about what The Shining is about. It's like an hour and a half long. And it's just people like going off about some of the wildest theories you ever heard about like every little seemingly imperceptible or unimportant detail in this film apparently has some deep meaning to someone out there in the world, you know? Like, there are people out there who are absolutely obsessed with this film. Like, this is like their 9/11, you know? Like, this film is like their conspiracy theory. It's pretty wild, you know? Like, if you're ever really bored, everybody who's listening, I guess you could put this documentary on. I don't necessarily recommend it, like I said, but it is kind of interesting in a very strange way.
Yeah, like, I thought it was about ghosts.
You're like, it's not about a haunted hotel?
Yes, literally, I was like, I thought it was just like spooky.
Funny though, you know, like I was saying before, you know, I have seen this film before, but this time I was just like, film is not really about a haunted hotel at all. You know, like that's kind of the impression I was left with at the end of the day. The book is, this is not really. There's only one scene in this film that I feel like implies that there really could be something supernatural going on. And even this, I guess you could come up with some other reason for how it happens. But the end scene where after Wendy locks Jack in the food pantry, he's like talking to like Grady, quote unquote, through the door. And then the door unlocks somehow, right? Yes. That you could say is a supernatural event, right? Because I was like, I was like reading quotes from Kubrick, and one he was talking, you know, about how like nothing really, like he purposefully left it ambiguous as to like whether or not there are actually ghosts. People have a lot of theories about it. One theory that I found says that every scene where Jack sees a ghost, there's also a mirror in the scene, which could imply that he is just his own psyche, right? A perception from his own psyche. That he's just seeing like himself, but he's perceiving it as a ghost, you know, or whatever. So that's one theory. But it doesn't hold up to that particular scene, right, in the food pantry. Mm-hmm. So that's really like the strongest argument for me as far as like there actually being supernatural presences in the hotel that are malevolent or whatever. But that could be like, like Wendy didn't lock the door properly, you know, or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a way to explain that off and be like, no, you know, it's still not proof, but I thought it was, you know, interesting.
Yeah. I'm just laughing because I'm like, I really thought this was about ghosts. Like, I really did.
No, Christina, it's about the Holocaust, okay?
Apparently. I really... A lot of stuff flies over me, so, you know, this included.
I don't have receipts for why it's about the Holocaust, but some people swear that it is, so... You know.
I gotta watch it again, I guess.
So infamously, I just want to bring this up real quick at some point in the podcast because it's much discussed. Like the Shelley Duvall thing, this is also discussed quite a bit online, and it's King being quoted several times as saying he does not like this adaptation of his book.
Oh, okay.
And there are quotes out there, of him saying that, he gets periodically asked about this every now and then, and kind of says the same thing. These days, he kind of tends to say something along the lines of, "It's a really well-made film. It's not a very good adaptation of my book." Right? If you ask me,
I can see that.
Yeah, right. If you ask me, I think the main thing to understand about that, or to glean from him saying that, right, is that the book is like we were saying earlier in the episode, the book is more about this supernatural haunted place that exacerbates someone's problems, right, to the point where it makes them go mad, essentially. The film is a psychological horror film that's mainly dealing with domestic abuse, right? And domestic violence. And it has some supernatural elements. But that's quite different, right? Like, that's not the same story. And I don't think King was really going for a domestic abuse story in that way, right? It's clearly something that was on Kubrick's mind, though, because that's what the film ends up really focusing on, right? Is the dynamic between Jack, his wife, and his son, and how he becomes increasingly more violent and erratic and volatile towards them, right?
Yeah.
After it already being implied that he hurt his son in the past when he was drunk, right? He pulled his son's arm too hard and dislocated his shoulder. And the way that in the beginning of the film, like, Jack is kind of like flippant about Wendy, but as the film progresses, he uses increasingly violent language when he refers to her. Like, the scene at the bar table, or at the bar counter, when he's talking to Lloyd, like this imaginary bartender, right? He refers to Wendy as a sperm bank, right? He's like, the sperm bank upstairs, right? And I had forgotten about this line, and I was like, that's incredibly violent language. Like, incredibly violent,
So
like harrowing
gross.
language, right? Like, I was like, I'm pretty sure that's not in the book. You know what I mean?
No.
Like, that just gave me pause this time, because I was like, ooh, I didn't remember that. I think maybe it's also like hearing that in 2024 when, like, oh man, things are rough right now, like regarding all kinds of things, abortion access, contraception is apparently on the table, we could go on. But to hear that in 2024, I was like a jolt, right?
Yeah.
As far as like the stark difference between this book, the book and this film, right? And like kind of what it's focusing on. I don't know if maybe that line is in the book, right? It has been a while since I've read the book. I mean, but I just forgot that it was in the film, right? And to me, it just became this moment where I was like, oh, this film is really it's about domestic violence, and about like patriarchal violence against everyone else, right? He literally, like, in the book, I'm just going to spoil it for you because it's not really much of a spoiler if you've seen the film.
Yeah.
Dick Halloran does not die in the book, right?
Okay.
He does not die in the book. But Jack murders him in the film.
Oh,
right?
Yes.
Like, okay, so
violently.
not only does this man, like, enact violence and psychological terror on his wife, a woman, and his child, but also on a black man, right? So, like, even if this was somehow subconscious in Kubrick, it had to be present, right, in the methodology of these narrative choices that Kubrick made, right? Because that is an overt change from the book, right? That's a big change.
Huge.
And, like, that's a big change. And, like, both, okay, so I found several quotes, but both Kubrick, right, talking about King's book, there are several disparaging things I found that he was, like, not overtly disparaging, but kind of like, I found some quotes where he's like, I picked this book because I really thought it was good and I thought it was interesting, So clearly, to some extent, he did like the book enough that he wanted to adapt it to a film. But at the same time, every every quote that I found where he's discussing something that he changed from the book to the film version, he kind of says something along the lines of that I didn't like the version of that scene in the novel, you know, kind of like, I didn't like that, so I changed it, like that kind of energy, you know? So it's like, I found several quotes where like he's vaguely disparaging towards the book and vice versa, right? That King is like, this is a well-made film, but it's not a good adaptation of my novel. I don't care for it personally, you know, things like that. And to be honest with you, I have to take the writer's side in this because I am a writer, right?
Yeah.
And all I could think was, if someone was slated to direct a film version of my book and they made all these changes to my book, you know, because they said, well, I didn't like that scene in the book, so I changed it for my film, I'd be pissed.
Yeah.
I'd be like, yeah, that's not my story. That's some other thing, you know? So can you really be mad at King for like being like, this is just not a good adaptation of my book? You know, objectively, that is true. Like, objectively, that is true. He's not saying this is not a well-made film, but like, it's ostensibly based on his story, right? And it's not a great adaptation of his story. It's whatever Kubrick wanted to make. Right? So as a writer, I think one is perfectly within their rights to feel some type of way if this happens to them.
Oh, absolutely. Especially, like, how is killing that guy, what does that bring to the film? I guess just, like, it's a horror film?
Yeah. Essentially,
like, that seems like a big thing to change in the book.
Yeah. Essentially, the quote I found regarding that, Christina, was that Kubrick wanted us to get, like, one final gut punch, right? As far as like being sure that they were actually going to survive this, Wendy and Danny specifically. Okay. He felt like it was anticlimactic, I believe, to have Dick live, right? And to like save them, quote unquote, or like to come to their rescue the way that he is doing, right? So he wanted the audience to remain unsure up till the very, very end if Danny and Wendy were going to survive. So that was what he said was his reasoning, right? But to me, you know, one can't ignore the imagery, right, of this white patriarchal violence, right, enacted on not only women, not only children, but also minorities, right? To me, that is the violence at the crux of the film, you know?
Yeah. Because
that's
it's
my
very
perception
brutal.
of it. Yeah. And that's my perception of it, right? And like, you know, so he makes this artistic choice to change that. There's a certain resonance to that. It plays a certain way, right? So you can disagree with me as far as like it being specifically about that, but like when I watch it, that's my perception. And from that quote that I read of Kubrick himself, you know, he is open to people's interpretations of his work in so much as he wants them to infer whatever they feel is appropriate from watching his stuff. So
yeah, no, I agree. And I'm just sitting here thinking like I'm realizing, I mean, I kind of felt this way anyway, but I just liked it because I feel like the vibes are just so spooky ooky. But it's basically like this guy sucks at writing, and it's somehow everyone else's fault. You know what I mean? And I feel like we see
like
that
a complete
all the time.
Failure as a person, but it's literally everyone else's fault.
Yeah, and it's just like
interesting.
We see that a lot reflected in society. Like this guy sucks at something, but it's totally not his fault.
Women and feminine people watching this in 2024 were just like too real,
right?
Like too close to home. You know, like it's just it's a little, you know. I can't say that it wasn't. I did find it quite harrowing this time, perhaps in ways I did not anticipate.
Yeah,
because of the climate,
especially with like the lens of like parenthood and stuff. Yeah,
definitely. Oh, a couple things I really want to bring up that I really like about this film, right? Because we've been a little bit, I wouldn't say critical of it, but we've been, you know, really digging into things that are in this film, right? But two of the things I really like. One is that I really like that they built the interior sets of the hotel to be purposefully dissonant and disorienting, right? So I have a really good quote here about that. This is from a screenwriter. His name is Todd Alcott. He did not work on the script for this film. A woman actually worked on the script for this film with Kubrick, by the way. Her name is Diana Johnson, and she is primarily known as a novelist. I meant to bring that up earlier to you just because I think it's incredibly interesting as far as like how this film turned out the way it did. One has to assume that she was very conscious of all these things that she was putting into that script as far as domestic violence goes. But this quote is really good also in regards to like what I was talking about with like these sets being built in a way that would make us feel strange and disoriented. Much has been written, some of it quite intelligent, about the spatial anomalies and inconsistencies in The Shining. There are rooms with windows that should not be there, and doors that couldn't possibly lead to anywhere. Rooms appear to be in one place in one scene and another place in another. Wall fixtures and furniture pieces appear and disappear from scene to scene. Props move from one room to another, and the layout of the overlook makes no physical sense. So this is something that I did not really feel like I consciously noticed any of the times I've watched this film. But I do feel like there's a deep subconscious element to this, right? Like, and I think that that's really awesome. Like, I think that that is super cool, right?
Yeah,
as far
I love
as like,
that.
yeah, like the visual like of this film being dissonant in that way. And I think probably a lot of people who watch this don't notice that, right? Mm-hmm. Now I feel like the next time I watch this film, I need a little while before I watch this film again. It's not the kind of film I feel like I want to revisit super often, to be honest. But
yeah, that's fair.
The next time I watch it, I will look for this, right? I will look for this kind of like doors being in weird places.
Yeah, I'm gonna look
windows
at every
being
door.
in random places, you know, like props moving around, like doors moving around, like things moving to different places in different scenes and all this. Like, I just think that is really, really cool. As far as like a horror film goes, you know, like creating this like real sense of unease in the space beyond just like the way that they built this rooms and things, you know, like that red bathroom that's really iconic, that green tiled bathroom with like the lady in the tub.
Yes.
Like, everybody remembers those sets from this film, but like I think less people are conscious of this element of the sets in the film, right? And I just thought that was super interesting and cool. Like in my first novel, my gothic horror novel, I specifically wanted to do something very similar. And like I said, I did not actually realize any of this about The Shining. So it certainly was not like, it wasn't an inspiration for my book or anything like that. This is just an idea that I really liked of Hillabahal, the Gothic manor in my book, being larger within than it is from the outside, having things, you know, rooms that can't possibly be there in the architecture from the outside, like that it having endless rooms, of it having, you know, like the rooms change places, they are there and then they change to something else, like halls elongate themselves, things like that. So it's like, I really love the idea in horror of like this like conscious house. Right?
Yeah.
Like this house that is aware of itself and can do things of its own will in that way, I think is so spooky.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
I really like that about this film. Another, one of the executive producers, there's a quote from him in a similar vein, and he was quoted as saying, because I think he was asked about this, like he's like, they were like, what's with like the lack of continuity for these things? And he said, it's a ghost movie. It's not supposed to make sense.
I got it. It's a ghost movie.
Like, I would debate you about the ghost movie thing, but I agree that it's cool that the house doesn't, that the overlook doesn't make sense, you know?
I can't even say I've ever noticed that. I always thought it was just like, what's the word I'm looking for? Just sort of like daunting, you know?
Yeah.
But
So
I also don't think I'm going to watch it anytime, but yeah. When I
but like
rewatch,
someday,
yeah.
when we get someday when like the like real world isn't quite so bleak and harrowing, maybe we'll like go back to this one.
I was going to say 4 years, but who knows?
catch me later.
Yeah, exactly.
One of these days. So the other thing I wanted to mention that I really like about this film, and you feel free to share something as well if you could think of a specific thing that you really like about this film, but I really like the very end with Jack chasing Danny through the snowy maze. I just think it looks fantastic. Like, it just looks
God,
so good.
yeah.
And it's so scary, you know? It just looks so... It's like that perfect marriage of, like, the really visually beautiful and the totally horrifically haunting the psychology of it, you know, being really horrible. That I think is, like, that sweet spot in horror that you're always kind of searching for. You're searching for, like, this beauty and terror that's, like, intertwined, like two lovers, you know? And that, to me, the end is like a chef's kiss for me. So I'm like, you know what? There may be scenes in this film that I find really difficult to watch because they're very upsetting for me. But, like, that scene is fantastic. Like, that scene I could watch 1,000 times, right? That's how I feel when I watch that. It made me, like, sit up, you know? Like, I've seen this film before, but it was one of those scenes, you know? It made me sit up where I was like, this looks great.
Yeah.
Like that.
So I don't fuck with mazes, like, ever. Like, I think a maze in itself is so scary.
Definitely.
Yeah, but
you could die in there.
And I would. Girl.
You would just be wandering in, like, a
need
circle.
Google Maps all the time, yeah. So even, like, it being, you know, a maze is really haunting, but you're right. It's, like, so beautiful. Like, it's so, like, pristine. But I also just am, like, I think Danny is just so clever to walk backwards in his own footsteps. Like, I wouldn't have the wherewithal to do that as an adult. So I just really am like, I really enjoy Danny, like the way that child actor, I mean, because I know you mentioned it was portrayed to him as a drama.
Yeah, they didn't tell him apparently that he was at a horror.
That's just incredible because he just did a great job. But yeah,
I don't know.
And
like I said, I don't know how they got some of those reactions from him.
I have no
and
idea.
Didn't tell him it was horror, you know. But hey, that's what I read.
Yeah.
So.
But even though I've seen that movie, you know, enough times, I still am like, come on, like he's right there. Like I still get real freaked out, you know. So I agree, great ending.
Yeah, fantastic. So yeah, I think, you know, regardless of how you feel about this film, I mean, I would say most people really, at least profess to really love this film, right? Which is interesting, I think. I think it's important with a film as kind of emotionally fraught as this one, that people have discourse, right? About the film, about its implications, about its subject matter, right?
Yeah.
About the specific ties to realism in its horror, right? So I think it's totally cool to love a film that is objectively horrible, right? I'm a huge horror fan. I would defend that to the death, right? But at the same time, I think specifically in a world where we are, you know, part of such extreme violence towards feminine people every day, all the time, it's really, really important to interrogate, you know, films like this, especially being made by you know, heteronormative white men, right? I think it's very important to have discourse around these films. Especially when the director themselves didn't really partake in that discourse. And part of it was the time period, I'm sure. But there was also this, like, aspect of Kubrick, clearly, that, like, didn't talk about his films in a lot of detail, right? So I think that we, as the audience, we have a responsibility, right, to have an ongoing conversation about things like this. Yeah.
Agreed.
So, but, you know, you go on Letterboxd and, like, a lot of people are just, like, they kind of, like, they're, like, I love this film because it's really well made, you know, or something like that. And I'm just like, okay, but, like, let's talk about this film, you know? Let's talk about what this film is. Yeah, let's talk about what this film is dealing with, because it's a little more complicated than just, like, being like, I like this film because it looks really good, right? Are we, like, you know, art has more of a purpose than that, right? And certainly Kubrick's art certainly does, you know, like, he may not have been willing to personally talk about it, but I think he wanted his audience to talk about those things with themselves, you know, with other people. I think he wanted his audience to share ideas with each other about the meaning of something. From those quotes that I found, that's certainly what I inferred, you know. So,
and here we are.
Let's, yeah, exactly. So let's continue to have these difficult conversations, I think would be my end note, about films like this that are kind of universally beloved, but not interrogated, I think, as much as perhaps they should be, as far as like an ongoing conversation. And not just being like, you have to like this because it's so well made, I'm like,
yeah, exactly.
Let's dig let's be a little bit more nuanced than that.
Agreed.
We can talk about the things that are strong in this film, and maybe the things that are like a little bit thorny as far as like a narrative choice, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Christina, for choosing this film. I do want to say I found it very informative to watch this again, right? I wouldn't call it I enjoyed watching this again. There are certainly things in this film I enjoyed watching again, right? I think I really appreciated this film a lot this time watching it, and I have a lot of respect, perhaps more respect than ever, for the level of craft in the film, right?
Yeah.
But I also feel some type of way about it, perhaps more than ever, and feel like every time I watch it, maybe that I want to rewatch it less. Right? I'm having a hard time explaining myself, but like I'm like this is like a really this is just like a really important film in a lot of ways, right? But do I want to would I ever like be like, this is my favorite film, I want to rewatch it all the time? Absolutely fucking no. Mm-hmm. And like if you feel that way, I'm like, oh my God, like, are you going to therapy? Like,
yeah, like this is not the comfort film.
Imagine. There's somebody out there like that, and I'm just like, I just want to be like, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, they're like,
what happened to you?
I'm gonna put on my movie, and it's this.
So at the very end here, I want to do what I always do, which is share a spell that has something to do with the film. This one, I wanted to keep it simple, right? For this episode, I am doing a sachet to protect one from evil. Because like I was saying, this film is bad vibes. And after this film, I was like, I need to like cleanse my house. Like that's that's the vibe level of offness,
Yeah.
But a really, really simple thing you could do if you're feeling, like maybe you need some protection from bad vibes is to make a sachet. So a sachet is just a little drawstring bag. You can order them online in bulk a lot of the times. Like you can just like go online and find a pack of like 20 of them, People use them a lot for like their jewelry or, and I do that sometimes. I put like my jewelry in a little sachet if I'm going on a trip because it keeps your stuff from getting tangled. People like put, if you buy something on Etsy, sometimes people will send it to you in a sachet. It's like just a little bag. But I would say that for anybody who is getting into the craft, who is a new practitioner, definitely invest in some sachets. They're just something that's really inexpensive that you can use to whip up spells really, really quickly. So there are dozens of herbs associated with protection from evil, like so many. This is one of those things where this is one of those issues where there's just so many remedies for this specific problem, right? And a really good reference book that I would recommend anybody who's interested in the craft or is getting into witchcraft or is, looking into paganism should definitely have in their library at home is Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs. This is kind of like a seminal text as far as like a really good, simple, well-organized book that has to do with herbs and their magical properties, right? I chose just a few of the herbs that are listed in this book as protection herbs specifically, right? Because there are a lot. These ones I singled out because they're herbs that people might already have in their kitchen or might be able to access relatively easily. So here's a few herbs that you can add to your sachet that are for the protection from evil influences or from just bad vibes in the layman's terms. Basil, cedarwood, cinnamon, cumin, garlic, lavender, my favorite of all the bad vibes banishing herbs, which is nettle, mint, and raspberry. So you could use any combination of any of these. There are also many more herbs you can use as protection from, the evil eye, from bad influence, from negative energy, from people trying to fuck with you. But those are a few. So all you really need to do is put some of your herbs in. The amount of the herbs is not super important. It depends on how much you have of the herb. It depends on the size of the sachet, I would say try to put the same amount of each herb in there, though. So if you have just a little bit of some of them, put just a little bit of the other ones in there with it as well. You kind of want there to be like an equilibrium of the herbs so they can kind of work together in tandem. Tie the knot on the sachet 3 times. So we're always doing things by the rule of 3 times 3. And then at the end here, you can do this as you're tying or after. Recite, protect me, O powers that be, benevolence, peace, prosperity. Close the door on evils near me. Only love may linger. 3 times 3. So just carry this sachet around with you wherever you go. You can put it in your backpack. You can put it in your purse. You can keep it in your pocket. You can keep it in your jacket pocket. But it's just one of those really quick, really easy, great witchcraft spells that are great, especially for beginners when you're really trying to just do practical magic for the everyday, things that are useful and helpful. Yeah. For all the bad vibes out there, and we know there's a lot of them right now, and it's about to be 2025. So we need all the help we can get right now.
I'm making all the satchels, yeah. Agreed.
Christina, thank you so much. I had such a great time.
Great. Agreed.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to have you back sometime.
Yeah, I'll pick out a better movie.
No, it was awesome.
As above, so below. And peace out. Till next time. This podcast is produced by David Settle. He also made the music.